A desperate mother bursts into the emergency room, holding her listless baby. As the nurse investigates, she uncovers a shocking truth that changes everything. The emergency room buzzed with its usual rhythm, a controlled chaos that unfolded every night at Cityview General. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a cold, clinical glow over the rows of chairs in the waiting area, and the steady stream of patients coming through the automatic doors. The night shift had its own atmosphere, a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. Nurses and doctors moved like well-practiced dancers, balancing the weight of urgency with the necessity for calm. Rachel Matthews had worked here for nearly 10 years, and if there was one thing she had learned, it was how to find stillness in the storm. She stood at the nurses' station, reviewing patient charts with practiced efficiency, her eyes flicking between screens and papers as her hands moved with swift precision. It was just after midnight, the hour when the late-night emergencies began to trickle in. Mostly minor injuries, a few cases of food poisoning, and the occasional intoxicated patient. All in a night's work. The soft hum of the hospital's machinery provided a familiar backdrop as Rachel ran through the evening's patient list. The routine had a way of anchoring her in the chaos, giving her a sense of control over the uncontrollable nature of emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work that mattered. And on nights like these, she found solace in the rhythm of it all. Tonight had been unusually quiet. The waiting room held only a few patients, an elderly man with chest pains, a teenager nursing a sprained ankle, and a young woman sitting with her arm in a makeshift sling. Rachel had already assigned them all to rooms, and the doctors were handling their cases. The night, so far, had been routine. Rachel allowed herself a moment to stretch, rolling her stiff shoulders back as she sipped from her lukewarm cup of coffee. It wasn't her best night for energy, but she had trained herself to push through. This was the life she had chosen. Long hours, missed family dinners, but also the knowledge that she was helping people in their darkest hours. It was a sacrifice she had come to terms with long ago, but it didn't make the fatigue any easier. She glanced up at the clock, 12:13 a.m. "Looks like we're in for a quiet one tonight," muttered Linda, another nurse who had just returned from taking a blood sample in one of the patient rooms. She sat down next to Rachel, her tired smile betraying the long hours they had both clocked in over the past few days. "Don't jinx it," Rachel replied with a smirk, tapping her pen absently against the counter. "We're barely halfway through the shift." As if on cue, the double doors to the ER swung open. The chill of the outside air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of rain pelting the pavement. Rachel looked up, her trained eyes immediately locking onto the figure who had entered the room. A young woman, drenched from the rain, her wet hair sticking to her face, her clothes clinging to her frail frame. In her arms, she held a small bundle, tightly wrapped in a tattered blue blanket. The woman's steps were frantic, stumbling as she made her way to the front desk. Rachel's stomach dropped. This wasn't a sprained ankle or a routine case of food poisoning. The young woman's face was pale, and her eyes were wide with terror. "Help!" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking with exhaustion and panic. "Please, help my baby." In an instant, Rachel's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by the sharp focus that only true emergencies could bring. She was on her feet before the woman even reached the desk, her mind switching into high gear. Everything else in the room faded into the background. Rachel rushed to the woman's side, gently guiding her toward a chair. "It's okay, I'm here." "Let me see the baby," Rachel said, her voice calm but urgent. She had dealt with enough trauma cases to know that keeping the mother calm was half the battle. The baby's condition, however, couldn't wait. The young woman, Maria, looked down at the bundle in her arms as though she didn't want to let go. Her hands trembled as Rachel reached for the baby, carefully peeling back the damp blanket. The sight that greeted Rachel made her heart lurch. The infant's face was disturbingly pale and his breathing was shallow, barely there at all. His tiny chest rose and fell in weak, irregular bursts, as if his body was struggling to pull in each breath. Rachel's training took over. She felt for a pulse, faint but present, and immediately lifted her head, calling out in a clear, authoritative voice. "Code Blue, infant!" The room erupted into motion. Within seconds, a team of nurses and doctors converged, moving with the kind of seamless efficiency that only came from years of practice in the high-stakes world of emergency care. The baby was whisked out of Rachel's arms and into the trauma room, the doors swinging shut behind them as the medical team began their work. Rachel stayed behind with the mother, who was now collapsing into herself, her body shaking with sobs. Rachel knelt beside her, speaking in low, soothing tones. "He's in good hands. We're doing everything we can." "What's your name?" Maria, the woman stammered, her voice barely audible as she tried to control her sobbing. "Maria Sanchez." Rachel nodded, squeezing her shoulder gently. Okay, Maria. I know this is scary, but I need you to stay with me, all right? We're going to help your baby. But I need to ask you a few questions so we know how to treat him. Can you do that?" Maria sniffed, nodding weakly, though her eyes were unfocused, her breathing still ragged from the panic. He was fine this morning, and then I don't know what happened. He just started breathing funny, and I didn't know what to do. Please help him." "We are," Rachel assured her, though something tugged at the back of her mind. There was a vague, unsettled feeling about this whole situation, but she couldn't place it. "How old is your baby?" "Michael," Maria whispered, wiping her tear-streaked face. "He's just over a month old. Please, you have to help him." Rachel's pen hovered over the clipboard. She jotted down the information but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Why had Maria waited so long to bring him in? And where was Michael's father? These questions gnawed at her, but there was no time to delve into them now. The priority was the baby. "You did the right thing by coming in, Maria," Rachel said, trying to maintain a soothing tone. "Now, we're going to do everything we can, okay?" Maria nodded again, though her hands were still trembling as she clutched at the edges of her damp coat. Her eyes darted toward the trauma room door, her face contorted in fear. Rachel stood up and made her way to the trauma room, but not before casting one last glance at Maria. Something about the young woman's demeanor unsettled her. Yes, she was terrified, but there was more beneath the surface, something that didn't quite fit with the narrative of a frightened mother. Inside the trauma room, the team was hard at work. Dr. Jameson, the lead physician, met Rachel's gaze as she entered. "We've stabilized him for now," he said in a low voice and not taking his eyes off the infant. "But his oxygen levels are critically low. It looks like a respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. We're running tests, but the next few hours are going to be crucial." Rachel nodded, her heart heavy as she watched the tiny boy connected to the ventilator, his frail body dwarfed by the machines. "Did the mother give any useful information?" Dr. Jameson asked, adjusting the settings on the ventilator. "Not much," Rachel replied, glancing at the baby's vitals. "She said his name is Michael, and that he's just over a month old. But something feels off. She's panicking, but there's more to it. I can't shake the feeling that she's not telling the whole truth." Dr. Jameson's brow furrowed, his expression shifting from concern to suspicion. "Keep an eye on her. If there's more to this story, we need to know before we make any critical decisions. And if you think something's wrong, we may need to involve security or even the authorities." Rachel agreed, though the thought of calling the police on a terrified young mother filled her with unease. She wanted to believe that Maria was just overwhelmed and scared, but her instincts told her otherwise. As Rachel stepped back into the waiting area, she found Maria standing near the window, staring blankly at the rain-soaked streets outside. The woman's face was pale, her posture tense as if she were bracing for something far worse than bad news. "How is he?" Maria's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the hospital. "He's stable for now," Rachel said carefully, watching her closely. "We're still running tests, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Maria nodded, but her eyes never left the window, her hands still clenched into fists at her sides. "Thank you," she whispered again, though her voice lacked the relief or gratitude Rachel had expected. Rachel's unease grew. There was something in Maria's eyes, a flicker of guilt or perhaps shame. It was subtle, but Rachel had seen enough patients, enough desperate situations to know when someone was hiding something. As the rain continued to fall outside, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker story. Something wasn't right, and the truth, whatever it was, would soon unravel. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Rachel couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had been gnawing at her since Maria had stepped through the hospital doors. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it, not until she had the answers. Her hands moved methodically, reviewing patient charts, checking on the progress of other cases, but her mind was elsewhere. It always circled back to the baby in the trauma room and the mysterious woman who claimed to be his mother. At the nurse's station, Linda shuffled paperwork, casting a sidelong glance at Rachel. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Rachel didn't respond immediately. She closed a file, set it aside, and let out a long breath. "I can't stop thinking about her, it just doesn't add up." She waited hours before bringing him in, and she barely knows any details about his condition. What mother wouldn't be in here the moment her baby started struggling to breathe? Linda leaned back in her chair, studying Rachel's face. "I get it, but maybe she's just scared out of her mind. You've seen that before, right? People don't always think clearly in a crisis." Rachel nodded slowly, but her gut told her this was different. "It's more than that. She's hiding something, Linda. I can feel it." Linda gave her a skeptical look but didn't push further. Rachel knew she was right to trust her instincts. They'd saved lives before, and tonight, they were screaming at her to dig deeper. But how? The hospital was a place of trust. Patients confided in them, sometimes reluctantly, but always with the understanding that they would receive help. Rachel didn't want to be accusatory, especially with a woman who seemed so fragile. But there was no denying that Maria's story was full of holes. Rachel glanced at the clock. An hour had passed since baby Michael had been admitted, and she needed to check on his progress. But before she could move, the sight of a figure in the waiting room stopped her in her tracks. Maria was still there, sitting stiffly by the window, her posture rigid, hands clutching her coat as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The rain outside streaked down the glass in long, slow lines, mirroring the tension that pulsed through the air. "Stay here," Rachel murmured to Linda, pushing her chair back. "I'm going to talk to her." She approached Maria cautiously, mindful not to startle her. The woman's gaze was distant, fixed on something beyond the stormy night outside, her pale face reflected in the window's glass. Ghostly, almost detached. "Maria?" Rachel called softly. The woman's head jerked slightly as though she hadn't heard her approach. She blinked, tearing her eyes from the rain and focusing on Rachel, though there was a glimmer of something unreadable in her expression. Fear, perhaps, but not the kind Rachel expected. Is he okay?" Maria's voice was thin, strained with an edge of desperation that couldn't be hidden, but also, there was a distance to it, like she was asking about someone else's child. Rachel sat down beside her, keeping her movement slow, deliberate. "Michael is stable for now. The doctors are doing everything they can. But Maria, I need to talk to you. We need to understand exactly what happened tonight." Maria's face remained blank for a moment, her eyes flickering with something akin to panic before she composed herself. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her body closing off. "I told you everything," she said quietly, her voice faltering. "I don't know what else you want from me." Rachel softened her tone, but she couldn't back down. "I understand that this is overwhelming, but to help Michael, we need to know more. You said he was fine this morning. Can you tell me exactly when things changed? What were you doing when you noticed something was wrong?" Maria's breathing quickened, and Rachel could see the tension building in her stiff shoulders. Her eyes darted around the room as though searching for an escape route, but there was none. She was cornered, and Rachel could feel her growing agitation. "I don't know," Maria stammered. "He was sleeping, then he started crying a lot. I thought it was just colic or something. Babies cry, right?" "They always cry." Rachel nodded, maintaining eye contact, urging her to continue. "Hey, but then it got worse, didn't it? You said his breathing changed. How long did that go on before you brought him in?" Maria's face paled further. "A few hours, maybe. I don't know." "I don't remember," she snapped, her voice rising as her frustration spilled over. "I was scared. What do you want me to say?" "I didn't know what to do." Rachel held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "It's okay to be scared, Maria. But waiting that long when his breathing was so bad, why didn't you come sooner? Was there something stopping you?" Maria froze, her eyes locking onto Rachel's for the first time with a sharp intensity that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. For a split second, Maria looked ready to bolt, but instead she lowered her gaze and whispered, I thought it would get better. I didn't know it would get this bad." Rachel watched her carefully, sensing there was more. Something unsaid. Something Maria was struggling to keep hidden, She glanced at Maria's trembling hands, the way they clenched the fabric of her coat like it was the only thing anchoring her. "Maria, I want to help you, but I need you to be honest with me. Is there someone else involved? Someone we should know about? Where is Michael's father?" Maria's head shot up, her eyes wide and filled with a raw, unfiltered fear. "No, I told you, there's no one. It's just me and him," she said, her voice cracking. She stood up abruptly, backing away from Rachel, her entire body trembling. Rachel stood as well, trying to remain calm, but the situation was spiraling. "Maria, please. If you're in trouble, we can help you, but we need the truth. You're not alone in this." "I told you everything." Maria's voice rang out louder than before, drawing the attention of the few remaining patients in the waiting room. Her eyes were wild now, darting between Rachel and the exit as if she were calculating how quickly she could get out of there. Rachel knew she was losing control of the conversation. She couldn't push Maria too far, but she also couldn't let her walk out. There was more at stake than just a scared mother and a sick baby. Rachel could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong, and Maria was hiding the key to unlocking the truth. Before she could say anything else, one of the doctors from the trauma room, Dr. Jameson, stepped into the waiting area, a grim look on his face. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. He caught her eye and gestured for her to come over. "I'll be right back," Rachel said to Maria, who had already started pacing near the window again, her back turned. Rachel crossed the room quickly, her nerves on edge. "Now what's going on?" Dr. Jameson's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "We've done what we can for now. The baby's stable, but barely. His lungs were in worse shape than we thought. Severe respiratory distress, possibly pneumonia. But that's not all. We ran some blood work and something came up." Rachel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Jameson handed her a sheet of results. "The blood type. It doesn't match Maria's. We double-checked. The baby, he's not hers." For a moment, Rachel felt the world tilt beneath her. Everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Maria wasn't Michael's mother. She had known something was wrong, but this kidnapping. Her mind raced, piecing together Maria's erratic behavior, the vague answers, the fear. It all made sense now. "I thought there was something off," Rachel muttered, her stomach knotting. "Do we notify the police? They've already been contacted." "There's more. A report came in a couple of hours ago from a hospital 2 towns over. A baby, matching Michael's description, was abducted this morning. The police believe it's the same child." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced back toward Maria, who was still pacing near the window. Unaware that her secret was about to come crashing down around her, Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We can't let her leave. She's dangerous." "Desperate," Dr. Jameson nodded. "Security is already on alert, but we need to keep her calm until the police get here." Rachel clenched the sheet of blood results in her hand, her pulse racing. She had to be smart about this. If Maria realized that the truth had been uncovered, she might do something reckless. There was no telling what she was capable of. Rachel couldn't afford to push her too hard now, but she also couldn't let her slip away. Steeling herself, Rachel approached Maria again, her voice as steady as she could make it. "Maria, I need you to come with me for a moment. We've got an update on Michael's condition and the doctor wants to talk to you privately." Maria hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Is he okay?" Rachel forced a smile. "We're doing everything we can. Just come with me and we'll explain everything." For a tense moment, Maria seemed frozen, weighing her options. But then, with a curt nod, she followed Rachel toward a small consultation room off to the side of the ER. Rachel opened the door, gesturing for Maria to enter first. As Maria stepped inside, Rachel glanced back at the waiting area where hospital security discreetly hovered. They gave her a nod of acknowledgement. The police were on their way. Inside the consultation room, Rachel closed the door behind them, her heart pounding in her ears. Maria turned to face her, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "What's going on?" Maria demanded, her voice sharp. Rachel met her gaze, feeling the weight of the next few minutes pressing down on her. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. "We just need to talk, Maria, about Michael. And about who he really is." The air in the small consultation room was thick with tension, pressing in on Rachel's chest as she faced Maria. The sound of Maria's ragged breathing filled the space, loud and uneven. Each breath a struggle to maintain composure as the truth began to unravel. Rachel could feel her own pulse in her ears, the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Outside, the rain continued to fall in relentless sheets, the storm mirroring the chaos inside the hospital walls. "Maria," Rachel said, keeping her voice low, her tone gentle but firm. "We need to talk about what really happened tonight." Maria's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white, and Rachel could see the tremble in her fingers. Her face was pale, drained of any remaining color, and her wide eyes were glossy with unshed tears. She was cornered now, like an animal trapped with no way out, and Rachel knew that one wrong word could send her spiraling. "I told you everything," Maria whispered, her voice trembling, but there was a sharp edge to her tone, as if she was clinging to her story with the last shreds of her strength. "He's my baby. Michael is mine." Rachel shook her head, her eyes soft with sympathy, but her words were unyielding. "Maria, we ran some tests. The blood tests showed that Michael can't be your biological son. His blood type doesn't match yours, and there's more." Before Rachel could finish, Maria's face contorted with anger and panic. She stepped back, pressing her spine against the cold wall, her hands shooting up as if to protect herself from the truth. No, that's not possible." Her voice was shrill, frantic. "There has to be a mistake. You don't know what you're talking about. He's mine. He has to be mine." Rachel took a step forward, careful to keep her distance but knowing she needed to keep Maria calm, to guide her through this storm before she lashed out in desperation. "Maria, listen to me. I'm not here to judge you, but I need you to be honest. The police have been notified. They've told us a baby was taken from another hospital earlier today. A baby that matches Michael's description." At the mention of the police, Maria's entire body tensed, her eyes widening with sheer terror. Her breathing became erratic, and her chest heaved as she struggled to control her panic. Rachel saw it the moment Maria realized she was trapped, the moment she knew there was no way out. The truth was closing in, and the only thing left was how she would handle it. "I didn't take him," Maria said, her voice barely audible, each word a breathless plea. "I didn't steal him. You have to believe me. I found him. I was outside the hospital, and I saw someone leave him there. They just left him and all alone. I couldn't—" Rachel's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of Maria's frantic explanation. "You found him?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "And what do you mean? You saw someone abandon Michael?" Maria's eyes darted around the room, her movements jerky, as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She wiped her face with trembling hands, her fingers shaking so violently that she could barely control them. "Yes, I swear. There was a woman. I don't know who she was, but she left him on a bench outside the hospital. I thought maybe she couldn't take care of him. I didn't know what else to do, so I took him." Rachel's heart twisted. There was a strange, haunting sincerity in Maria's voice, a kind of desperation that was hard to fake. But this story made no sense. Why wouldn't Maria have gone straight to the authorities if she truly believed the baby had been abandoned? What was she hiding? "Maria," Rachel said, taking another careful step closer. "If you really found him, why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you take him to the hospital right away?" "I was scared." Maria's voice cracked, her eyes flooding with tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't mean to keep him. But then he started having trouble breathing and I panicked. I thought if I brought him here, they'd take him from me. I didn't want to lose him. I couldn't lose him." Rachel could see the desperation in Maria's eyes, the way she was clutching at her story, trying to hold on to something, anything that would keep her from losing the baby she had come to see as hers. But the truth was already slipping through her fingers, and Rachel could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of them. "Maria," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm, "you need to tell the police the truth. If you found Michael, they'll investigate. But right now, keeping this secret is only making things worse." Maria shook her head violently, her tears falling faster now, her face contorting with anguish. "No, you don't understand. You can't let them take him. He's all I have. I don't have anyone else. I just wanted to help him." Her voice broke and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her hands, her entire body shaking with the force of her grief. Rachel's throat tightened, watching Maria unravel before her eyes. but there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. The situation had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. As Rachel knelt down beside Maria, trying to offer some form of comfort, there was a knock at the door. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat, and she turned to see two uniformed police officers standing in the doorway, their faces grim. "Monsieur Sanchez," one of the officers said, stepping into the room, his voice low but commanding. "We need to speak with you about the baby you brought in tonight." Maria's entire body went rigid at the sound of the officer's voice. She lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes wild with terror. "No, please no," she whispered, backing away from them, her hands raised as if to ward off the inevitable. Rachel stood, moving between the officers and Maria, her heart pounding. "She's scared," she said quietly to the officers. "She thinks you're going to take the baby away." The officer nodded, his face softening slightly, but his tone remained firm. "We need her to cooperate. If there's been a misunderstanding, we'll figure it out, but she needs to come with us." Maria let out a strangled cry, her back pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. "No, you don't understand. He's all I have." Her voice cracked with desperation, and Rachel could feel the tension in the room rising, the situation spiraling out of control. Rachel took a step toward Maria, speaking softly. "Maria, listen to me. You need to go with them. If what you're saying is true, they'll figure it out. But if you run, it's only going to make things worse. I promise you they'll help you." But Maria wasn't listening. She was too far gone, consumed by panic and fear. Her eyes darted wildly between Rachel and the officers, and in one frantic motion, she pushed herself off the wall and bolted for the door. "Hey, Maria, no!" Rachel shouted, but it was too late. The officers moved swiftly, blocking Maria's path as she tried to escape, her cries echoing through the small room. One of them gently but firmly grabbed her arm, restraining her as she thrashed and sobbed, her pleas falling on deaf ears. "Please, please, don't take him away from me. He's mine. He's mine!" Maria screamed, her voice breaking as she fought against the officers. "Hold!" Rachel watched in stunned silence, her heart aching at the sight of Maria's complete breakdown. She had seen many people in moments of crisis, but this was different. This was a woman who had lost everything, who had clung to the one thing she thought she could save, only to have it ripped away from her. As the officers led Maria out of the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway, Rachel stood frozen, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe Maria's story, wanted to think that she had simply made a terrible, desperate mistake. But the evidence was too damning, the facts too clear. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet voice behind her. "Rachel?" She turned to see Dr. Jameson standing in the doorway, his face drawn with concern. "The police are taking her in for questioning. But there's something else you need to know." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Dr. Jameson sighed, his eyes heavy with the weight of the news. "The real mother? She's been found. She's on her way here. She's been searching for her baby all day." Rachel's heart sank. The baby had a mother, a real mother who had been living a nightmare, not knowing where her child was, fearing the worst. And now, she was on her way to the hospital, completely unaware of the chaos that had unfolded. As the rain continued to beat against the windows, Rachel felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, the tangled threads of Maria's story unraveling into something far more complicated and tragic than she could have imagined. And in the quiet, dim room, as the sound of Maria's cries faded into the distance, Rachel knew one thing for certain. The storm was far from over. Rachel stood in the now empty consultation room, the weight of the night pressing down on her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The chaos of the last few hours had taken its toll, and she felt drained, emotionally, physically, mentally. The cold fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, a dull hum that filled the silence left in the wake of Maria's anguished screams. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jarred her back to reality. She glanced at the clock, 3:45 a.m. The hospital was still, but beneath that calm surface was the crackling tension of what was to come. The real mother, Michael's mother, was on her way, and with her arrival would come the final unraveling of everything. Rachel's heart ached. Maria's story, no matter how flawed, was filled with the raw, desperate love of someone who had tried to cling to something they weren't meant to have. But that didn't make it right. A child had been stolen, and another mother had been living a nightmare for hours, wondering if her baby was even alive. Dr. Jameson's voice broke through her thoughts. "Rachel, are you okay?" She blinked, looking up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression tight with concern. His presence grounded her, and she forced herself to take a deep breath. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice softer than usual. "It's just a lot." Dr. Jameson nodded, understanding the weight she was carrying. "I know, we all feel it. But we need to prepare for what's next." Rachel swallowed, the tightness in her chest refusing to ease. "What do we know about the real mother?" He stepped into the room holding a manila folder under his arm. "Her name is Amanda Pierce. She's from a town about an hour away. Apparently, she left her baby in the nursery at her local hospital, and when she came back to check on him, he was gone. The staff there raised the alarm immediately, but by the time they realized what had happened, Maria was already long gone." Rachel winced. She could only imagine the terror Amanda must have felt, coming back to an empty crib. Her worst nightmare realized. How did they lose track of him for so long? Dr. Jameson sighed. Hospitals can be chaotic, especially in maternity wards. From what we've gathered, Maria blended in with the visitors and somehow slipped away with the baby before anyone noticed. By the time the police were involved, she'd already brought Michael here. Rachel shook her head, anger and frustration swirling inside her. And now she's gone. Maria's been arrested, and Amanda's on her way here to take her baby back. But I can't stop thinking about Maria. What drove her to do something like this? Dr. Jameson leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. It's hard to say. People who are that desperate often aren't thinking rationally. She must have seen an opportunity and taken it. Maybe she was struggling with her own loss, or maybe she saw Michael and thought she could fill some void in her life. Rachel's mind raced back to Maria's frantic words, her desperate pleas. "He's all I have. I don't have anyone else." Those words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Maria's pain. But then there was Amanda, the real mother who had been living through her own private hell. Rachel had seen both sides now. One woman who had lost everything and taken drastic measures, and another who had everything taken from her, left to fear the worst. Both women, in their own way, were victims of a cruel twist of fate. "I should go check on Michael," Rachel murmured, her voice heavy with fatigue. "He's stable, but I don't know. This whole situation feels like it's barely holding together." Dr. Jameson nodded, his expression softening. "I go. I'll handle things on this end." Rachel offered him a grateful smile, though it didn't reach her eyes, and turned to leave the room. As she made her way down the sterile hospital hallway, her footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the thick quiet of the night. The trauma room where Michael lay was just ahead, the door slightly ajar, casting a thin line of light onto the polished floor. She paused at the door, peeking inside. The infant was swaddled in blankets, tubes and wires still connected to his tiny body. He was peaceful now, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. The ventilator had been removed, and his breathing, though shallow, was no longer erratic. For the first time since he'd been brought in, he looked like he was no longer in danger. Rachel approached quietly, her heart swelling as she looked down at him. How could something so innocent be caught in the middle of such a terrible situation? Michael had no idea of the storm raging around him, the battle for his future. He was just a baby, helpless, vulnerable, and in need of protection. The door creaked behind her, and Rachel turned to see a nurse peeking in. "Is everything okay?" the nurse asked softly, glancing at the baby. Rachel nodded. "Yeah, he's doing better. I just needed to check on him." The nurse smiled and understanding. "The mother, Amanda Pierce, she's on her way. Should be here in about half an hour." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Thanks," she whispered, turning back to Michael. "Half an hour. In 30 minutes, the woman who had been waiting in agony would be here. And Maria?" Rachel shuddered at the thought of what would happen to her now. Prison, a psychiatric evaluation? She didn't know, but whatever came next, Maria's life was over as she knew it. Time moved slowly after that. Rachel stood by Michael's bedside, lost in thought, until the sound of rushed footsteps in the hallway snapped her out of her reverie. She stepped back as the door opened. Amanda Pierce entered the room, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with desperation and fear. She moved with the jerky, frantic energy of someone who had been on edge for hours. unable to breathe, unable to think of anything other than her missing child. Rachel's heart clenched as she watched the woman approach the crib, her hand trembling as she reached for Michael. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, her lips quivering as she looked down at her baby. Michael," she whispered, her voice breaking as her fingers gently touched his tiny cheek. "Oh my God, Michael." Rachel stepped back, giving Amanda space, watching as the woman cradled her baby with the kind of fierce, protective love that only a mother could feel. The scene was raw, emotional, and Rachel felt her own eyes prick with tears. Amanda's sobs filled the room as she held her son close, murmuring words of love and relief into his soft hair. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Maria's desperate cries, the chaos of the last few hours. It was just a mother reunited with her child, the bond between them stronger than anything Rachel had ever seen. But as Amanda rocked her baby gently, Rachel couldn't help but think of Maria, alone in a police car, her world shattered. It wasn't right. None of it was right. One woman had her life restored, but another's had been torn apart. And the complexity of the situation left Rachel feeling hollow. Dr. Jameson appeared in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. He caught Rachel's eye and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "It's over now. The baby is safe." But Rachel didn't feel relief. Instead, she felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, the lingering sadness for what had been lost. Yes, Michael was safe, but the scars of this night would last a lifetime. For Amanda, for Maria, for everyone. As Rachel left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that, while the storm had passed, the damage it left behind would be felt for a long time. She knew that neither woman would ever be the same again, and neither would she. The hospital's hallways were eerily quiet as Rachel made her way back to the nurse's station, the events of the last few hours playing over and over in her mind. The tension that had filled the air seemed to have dissipated now that Michael had been reunited with his mother, Amanda. But for Rachel, the unease lingered. The weight of what had transpired still clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. Linda was waiting for her at the station, a cup of coffee in hand. She gave Rachel a look that was both knowing and sympathetic. "You look like you've been through hell," she said softly, handing Rachel the cup. Rachel took it, grateful for the warmth in her hands, but she couldn't bring herself to smile. "It feels like it," she admitted, sinking into the chair beside Linda. Her whole body felt heavy, as if she were carrying the emotional weight of both Maria and Amanda. "Did the mother get here?" Linda asked, concern lacing her voice. Rachel nodded, taking a sip of the coffee, though it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. "She's with Michael now." It was emotional. "I can't even imagine what she's been through." "And Maria?" Linda's voice was softer now, a note of unease creeping in. "What happens to her?" Rachel shook her head, exhaling a long, tired breath. "Oh, and she's with the police. They'll figure it out, but I don't know what's going to happen to her. Part of me thinks she didn't mean any harm, but then she took someone else's baby. How do you come back from that?" Linda looked down at her hands, fidgeting with a pen. "It's hard to say. People do crazy things when they're desperate. Maybe she thought she was helping, or maybe she was trying to fill a hole in her own life. Either way, she crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." Rachel nodded slowly, her thoughts returning to Maria's anguished face, her broken sobs as the truth closed in on her. "He's all I have." Those words haunted Rachel, echoing in her mind like a sad refrain. What had Maria been running from? What pain had driven her to such a desperate act? "You know what's crazy?" Rachel said after a long pause. "I can't stop thinking about her, about Maria. I know she did something terrible, but I keep wondering, what if she hadn't found Michael? What if no one had?" Linda sighed. "It's hard not to feel for her, but we can't forget Amanda either. That woman almost lost her baby. They're both victims in a way." Rachel leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. "Yeah, they are. And Michael, he's the one caught in the middle of all this." The night shift dragged on, the weight of the hours pressing on Rachel's shoulders as she moved through the routine tasks, her mind never far from what had happened. Eventually, as dawn approached, the emergency room began to stir with new arrivals, the bustle of morning life pushing the events of the night into the background. But for Rachel, the weight of what had happened lingered like a stain she couldn't wash away. It wasn't until just after sunrise that Rachel found herself heading out to the hospital's small courtyard for a moment of quiet. The air was crisp, the early morning sun breaking through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the damp ground. The rain had stopped, but the remnants of the storm still clung to the leaves and flowers, droplets catching the light like tiny diamonds. She sat on a bench, breathing in the cool air, trying to shake the heaviness that had settled in her chest. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the image of Maria's tear-streaked face, or Amanda's overwhelming relief as she held her baby again. Rachel was lost in thought when she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Amanda standing a few feet away, cradling Michael in her arms. The sight of them made Rachel's heart ache, a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. "Can I sit?" Amanda asked softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Rachel nodded, gesturing to the spot beside her. "Of course." Amanda sat down carefully, adjusting the baby in her arms. Michael was sleeping peacefully, his tiny fists curled up under his chin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know how to thank you," Amanda said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved him. If it weren't for you, I don't know where he'd be." Rachel shook her head, her throat tightening. "I just did my job, Amanda. You don't have to thank me." But Amanda turned to her, her eyes filling with tears. No, you don't understand. I've been living a nightmare for the last 24 hours. I thought I'd never see him again." She looked down at Michael, her hand gently stroking his soft hair. And when I saw that crib empty, it was like the world just stopped. And then, when they told me they'd found him here, her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes, struggling to keep her composure. "I thought I'd lost him forever." Rachel's chest tightened, the enormity of what Amanda had been through settling in her bones. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," Rachel said softly. "I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been." Amanda nodded, her eyes distant as she rocked Michael gently in her arms. "I keep thinking about her," she said after a long pause. "The woman who took him, Maria, why did she do it? What was she thinking?" Rachel bit her lip, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think she was desperate. Lost, maybe. It doesn't make it right, but I don't think she meant to hurt anyone." Amanda was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on Michael. "It's hard to hate her," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should hate her for what she did. But all I can think about is, what if she hadn't brought him here? What if she'd just left him somewhere? He might have died." Rachel swallowed hard, her emotions swirling in a confusing mix of sadness, anger, and compassion. "You're right," she said softly. "But she made the wrong choice. She should have called for help the moment she found him." Amanda nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears again. "I know, but still, part of me feels like she saved him too. In her own twisted way, she kept him safe." They sat in silence for a long time after that, the sounds of the hospital fading into the background as the sun rose higher in the sky. Amanda cradled her son, and Rachel sat beside her, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift, if only just a little. Eventually, Amanda stood, adjusting Michael in her arms. "I thank you again," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "For everything," Rachel smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "You take care of him, Amanda. He's a lucky little boy." Amanda nodded, her lips trembling with the weight of her emotions. Then, with one last look at Rachel, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway with her baby safely in her arms. Rachel sat there for a while longer, letting the quiet settle around her. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered, leaving behind the scars of what had been lost and found in the span of a single night. As the morning sun warmed her face, Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this night, this story, would stay with her for a long time. And though the baby had been saved, the echoes of Maria's cries would never fully leave her.